what if I told you that true knowledge wasn't something you study for, but something you actually pray for? It's a fascinating idea, right? Today, we're going to dive into that very concept, taken from the teachings of speaker Daniel Lemte. This is all about what he calls spiritual conception, a really unique way of looking at wisdom and who you choose as a mentor.
Right off the bat, Lemte's core philosophy just flips conventional learning on its head. He's not saying you should go compare a bunch of different scriptures or come up with some big intellectual opinion. No. For him, deep spiritual understanding comes from direct revelation, and that one idea really changes the whole game.
So let's get into it. Our first section is all about this idea of praying to know. It's about getting that direct, spirit-led connection to knowledge, and Lemte uses this one really powerful metaphor to explain it all. And here it is, the central concept. The spiritual belly. Now, he's very clear, this is not your physical stomach. Think of it as the belly of your soul, a kind of spiritual womb. This is where, he says, divine seeds are carried and living waters flow from. You've got to keep this idea of a spiritual womb in your head because it is the absolute key to understanding the story we're about to unpack. So how does this actually work in practice? Well, Lemte points to a perfect example of this spirit-to-spirit connection, the biblical story of Mary and Elizabeth. All right, so picture this. The angel has just delivered this world-changing message to Mary. So now, in Lemte's language, she is spiritually pregnant. That divine word has become a seed inside her. And what's her very first move? She immediately goes to see her relative Elizabeth. And this is where we see the first supernatural sign. The second Mary speaks, the baby inside Elizabeth's womb, that's John, he leaps. This isn't just some random kick. Lemte sees this as the very first moment of spiritual recognition. But it doesn't stop there. Right after that physical reaction, something spiritual happens. Elizabeth is filled with the Spirit, and she speaks a prophecy. Her words are the critical, out-loud confirmation that Mary needed to hear. She validates it for her, saying she is, in fact, the Mother of God. And this is the absolute kicker in Lemte's teaching. He says it was a spirit-to-spirit communication. This was way more than just two cousins saying hello. The divine seed in Mary's spiritual womb was literally communicating with the one inside Elizabeth's. And that spark of recognition is what triggered the prophecy. Okay, next up, Mary's intelligent choice. Because Lemte argues her decision to go see Elizabeth wasn't just a random impulse. It was an act of incredible spiritual intelligence. You see, he makes this powerful point that to truly serve God, you need a special kind of intelligence. He's not talking about being book smart or having a high IQ. He's talking about the ability to pick up on spiritual clues and then act on them with wisdom. And Mary's journey here, it's the perfect example. So you might be asking, why Elizabeth of all people? Well, first, the angel had already given Mary a little clue that Elizabeth was also miraculously pregnant. But even more important, Mary knew that her own mother and her friends, they just wouldn't get it. Their doubt, Lemte says, could have actually caused a spiritual miscarriage, a total loss of faith. Mary needed to be around someone who had already been through a miracle, someone who knew the territory. And that choice she made just drives home a huge lesson in Lemte's teaching. Real spiritual wisdom means going to exactly the right person for advice. Mary knew she couldn't just talk to anyone. She needed someone who was on a similar, miraculous path. Now, this is where Lemte pivots from this ancient story and brings it right into our world today. And he delivers a really serious warning about something he calls false wombs. He draws this really sharp line in the sand. On one side, he sees Mary as God's chosen surrogate, where a holy seed was placed directly by God to fulfill a divine purpose. But then he contrasts that with modern medical surrogacy, which he argues is a man-made invention that actually fights against God's will. And he does not mince words on this at all. He says that sure, to the carnal mind, a worldly perspective, it might seem clever. But to the spiritual man, he says it is demonic, satanic, purely evil. So what's the reasoning behind such a strong stance? Well, it's theological. The idea is, if God is giving a pure divine seed, then where it's planted, the womb, is just as important. He argues that putting a divine seed into a vessel that God didn't choose could corrupt or even completely destroy its purpose right from the start. And all of this brings us to a very personal, very direct question. Who are you following? This is really the heart of the lesson on spiritual mentorship. Here's the key takeaway. If you feel that you're spiritually pregnant, carrying a purpose, a calling, a seed from heaven, then it is absolutely critical that you connect with other people who are also pregnant. You have got to find your Elizabeth. So he basically gives us a roadmap. First, you have to recognize what it is you're carrying. Then you find your Elizabeth, someone who is also carrying a divine purpose, maybe even someone who is a little further along than you are. You make that spirit-to-spirit connection, and that's how you get the guidance you need to protect your faith and avoid that spiritual miscarriage. But here comes the huge warning label. He says to beware of what he calls barren leaders. He describes these as people who may have committed spiritual abortion on their own calling, and he claims they won't just fail to help you, they will actively kill the seed growing in your spiritual womb. I mean, the stakes could not be higher. In his view, if you follow someone who isn't spiritually fruitful themselves, that thing you're carrying will never get the nourishment it needs. It will just wither away and die. You'll end up with a spiritual stillbirth. And so that's what it all comes down to. This final, very challenging question that Lamp Day leaves us with. Think about the people you listen to, the mentors you look up to, and you have to ask yourself, are they pregnant? It's a provocative thought for sure, and it really pushes all of us to think hard about where we're getting our spiritual nourishment from.